Welcome to San Diego Integral, September 10th, 2022. Our presentation today is Integral Pluralism and Multicultural Sensemaking, presented by Sushant Shrestha. Hello, everyone. Welcome to San Diego Integral. My name is Jerry Golick, and I'll be your host for this evening. And we'll get started shortly. We have an exciting presentation here today called Integral Pluralism and Multicultural Sensemaking, presented by Sushant Shrestha. And let me just mention a few housekeeping things before we get rolling. First of all, we will be recording this meeting, and the link for the recording will be posted on the Meetup site and on our YouTube channel a couple of days after the meeting. And if you prefer not to be seen on video, you can turn off your camera and just type questions in the chat box. We do like to see your face, and also be aware that the recording is of the speaker and not of the gallery. So if you're just in the gallery, your face won't be recorded. You can find information about all of our events on our website at sandiegointegral.org. We are on Meetup and Facebook, and you can find links for those on our website as well. And if you join one of those groups, Meetup or Facebook, you'll automatically be notified when we add a new event. If you do ever have any questions or comments about these meetings, you're welcome to contact one of our leadership team members through either Meetup or Facebook. Next month, we will be meeting on October 8th, and the topic will be Shadow Patterns, Hidden Dynamics of the Unconscious Mind by Kim Barta. And many of you know Kim, I'm sure. Those who don't, it's always a treat. Quite a amazing person and presenter, so I think that is going to be a great event. And finally, we would like to invite you to make a small donation to support San Diego Integral. And the donations help us to cover the meetup fees and web hosting and other expenses. And you can donate at sandiegointegral.org. If we have questions and answers today, you're welcome to either just unmute your mic and speak, or you can also use the raise your hand feature, which is under reactions at the bottom of the screen on the desktop. And if you're on a iPad or phone, usually you have to tap the screen to activate the menu, and you can find it under More. And we will have some members of our leadership team monitoring the chat. So if you have questions or anything, you can address them through that. And then right after the meeting, which the meeting is going to go for 2 hours. So at the end of the meeting, we still stay on for another 30 to 60 minutes for an informal social time and further exploration, questions and answers, and you're welcome to stay for that. So before we begin, I'd like to just start with a short kind of centering meditation to bring us all present here. So if you would like to either close your eyes or gaze downward, whatever your custom is, find yourself in a comfortable position. Notice the contact with your feet on the floor or your seat on the chair, your presence connected to the earth. Take a few deep breaths. Feel yourself connected to the earth. And also, as you feel yourself grounded and solid, connected to the earth, also direct your attention upward. Notice your connection to the heavens, to the energies that seem to come to us and through us. Become aware of the space around us, out of which everything arises moment to moment. A few more deep breaths. Notice the boundaries of your physical body, and notice within those boundaries there's also infinite space. out of which everything arises, all of our sensations and perceptions. And then feel the boundary of your body soften a little bit. Notice your energetic connections to the space around us, and to each other. There are 26 of us here today. All the places on the earth we've decided to be here with each other. Feel the connection between us. Feel the heart connection there. And from this sacred connected space, you can bring your attention back to the screen. Open your eyes when you're ready. And we will begin. But first of all, we would like to welcome any newcomers. If there is anyone here, new today? Kind of wave your hand. You have a couple people. So I see Joanne. If you'd like to just unmute yourself and give us very briefly just your name, where you're calling from, and how you heard about us, or put very quickly. Yeah.
I'm Joanne. Obviously, I'm living in Connecticut. Lived in New York most of my life, and I heard about San Diego from another meeting today and was researching some stuff.
Okay, welcome. Anyone else new? Any waving hands?
Hi, my name is Raquel White. I'm calling from Corona, California. I am new. I'm not gonna show a video because I'm folding clothes and I don't want to be distracted. Thank you for having me.
Great. Nice to have you here. Anyone else? Okay, welcome to everyone. And let's see here. So we're about to get started here. I'd like to just give like a little brief introduction of Sushant. Our title for today is Integral Pluralism and Multicultural Sensemaking. And for some of us that might take a little bit of thinking about what that means, and we will know a lot more by the end of the day. But one way that Sushant has described this is that the integral theory and spiral dynamics, they reveal unique insights about cultures and civilizations, but what might the cultural perspective reveal about the theories? And I've heard Sushant speak on this topic before, and I found it really just super interesting and creative. Sushant, he's a venture capital investor with a track record in working with projects in artificial intelligence, smart materials, blockchains. He is a graduate of the social finance program at Saïd Business School at Oxford University. And he has been involved in a lot of different projects worldwide, basically in the kind of finance space. And there's more technical bio is on our website. You're welcome to see that, and you see that. But I'd just like to introduce him as someone who I've come to really appreciate. And partly, I would say myself, the area of finance is something that I just never quite understood very well. And over the last several years, I would say I've come to understand more clearly just how crucial that is, and how how important it is, how much of a difference that work in this field can make. And so, like when I go to the Integral European Conference or something, I always try to watch the segments on finance because I just find it so interesting. It's something I don't know a lot about. And I bumped into Sushant. He was a graduate of the Pacific Integral GTC program, and he did a presentation. And I was just so, I just loved what I heard for a couple of reasons. One is it's in that area of finance, which I find fascinating. And he comes to it with a very creative and heart-centered way that I've just come to really love and appreciate in the time that I've known him. And so because I really appreciate him so much, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn this over to Sushant to begin our presentation for today. So take it away, Sushant.
Thank you, Jerry. That's so wonderful to be here with everyone. Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I always say that one of the big gifts of studying integral has been um, being able to meet new friends all the time, and everywhere I go, um, every city, there's sort of a friendship waiting to happen, and that's amazing gift. So I thank all the integral elders in our community, and it's an honor to be in presence of you, Suzanne. Um, I trained with Suzanne about 10, 11 years ago, and I've carried that, all the learnings, quite a bit close to my heart throughout these years. Um, Before we begin, I just want to complete the what Jerry was talking about finance, even though I was not planning to really go deep into it. It's such an important part of our life, both personal finance, investments, and those kind of things. And for the last several years, after I graduated from integral psychology program at JFK, uh, my inquiry has been how to bring, first it was how to bring integral ideas into the world of finance, and that has evolved into how to be a lover in the world of finance. How to be, finance is just it has such a warrior and a king kind of energy, if you talk about archetypes a little bit. And so my inquiry has been, how do I become a lover in the world of finance? How does lover transform the world of finance? So I've been working with this personal mantra of mine, which is transforming finance and financing transformation. So how do I work in the world of finance, which is very concrete numbers, spreadsheets, but also bring tremendous amount of love and fun, being able to fund, being part of a venture capitalist is being able to fund the future, right? Whatever projects get funded, they're the ones who sort of get manifested in the world. So it's very important to fund right projects in right way and all of that. So my professional and my personal inquiry around finance has been creating sort of an integral finance model. So there's a lot there. Maybe it's a different presentation, but so glad to be here. Maybe I'll start with a screen share. So let's begin with a short inquiry. This inquiry has been really close to my heart for a very long time, and I really started this during my GTC training at Pacific Integral. It's a simple inquiry. Like Jerry was talking about, we have decided to come here when we could be doing so many other things in the world right now. And so everything that has happened in each of our lives has led to this moment. So I just want to invite you to really listen into this moment and kind of really see what is present for you. As you look around the room, you see different faces. Some you recognize, some you don't. Just being aware of what is present for you at this moment. And just dropping in to our hearts a little bit more. How does it feel to listen from the heart? And see what's present. And as you see the faces in the room, put a gentle smile on your face and notice how that changes the quality of the space. And just smile a little bit wider And notice that it's not just your face that is smiling, but it's your whole being that is smiling. And notice it's the same smile that you see on other people's faces. Taking deep breaths in and out. Let's look around the room and notice what is absent. What is that quality of noticing what is absent? And can we really feel into the presence of what is absent? So I invite you to stay in this feeling, stay in this place of noticing what is present, what is absent throughout this presentation. We'll come back to this inquiry a few more times. And so while the presentation is going on, we might have different discussions, different conversations, but it's all standing on what is present and what is absent throughout. So wonderful to be here. And one of the things that I wanted to do differently this time in this presentation was I really wanted to hear who's present in the room. And I wanted to get a sense of what's happening in this community. And so I sent out this survey. So thank you so much for filling those out. I received about 27. 27th one came in this today, so I was not able to put that in, but 26 results. So I'd love to go through this quickly and kind of get a sense of what's present in this community in terms of demographics. So let's quickly go through this. I sent out a bunch of questions. Like the first one was, what is your age group? Interesting data there. And 38% in the range of 51 and 60, 30%, 71 and 80, 23%, 61 and 70. Very interesting. So you can kind of get a sense of who's present, what might have happened in their lives, who's your cohort, those kind of things. And I asked about ethnicity. So majority Caucasians and very few others. And your birthplace, mostly North American and Central America. 11% about Europe. So we can kind of start to sense, what are some of the perspectives, what are some of the background narrative that's present in this community. And education, lots of masters, 46%, 23% PhD, so highly educated group of people. And this I found really interesting. So what was the religion in your household when you were born? So Christianity being a major one. And I found hilarious when I looked at the next question, which is, which religion do you identify with now? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. So I was like, this is integral right here. It's a very spiritually promiscuous group. So I feel right at home. So I found that really interesting. There's all kinds of stuff there. So 80% moving to all different kind of things. So it's really shows where the community is at. And the beauty of that, right? It's because people are basically able to explore so many different traditions that calls them, and then still be able to identify within one group, which is a remarkable achievement, talking about human history and all of that. And I kind of resonate with many of them myself. Like, I feel like even though I came from a traditional Hindu and Buddhist background in Nepal, I grew up in Kathmandu. I explore many other things, including Western Mystery School, and I've been a Freemason. I've been a part of Rosicrucianism, and and somehow I came back to my own tradition in a very different way. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. And political views, very liberal, which is kind of interesting. Which is, my sense has always been true of the integral community as a whole, liberal leaning and liberal rational leaning, I would say. So it's very interesting. So slightly liberal and very liberal covers most of it. Very interesting. Not many libertarian. I would imagine there will be a little bit more, but yeah, very interesting. And language-wise, language is just such an important part of how we see the world, and how we understand the world, what objects we see in the world, how we make meanings. All of that is so important. And so probably not a surprise for you, mostly English here, and a few others sprinkled here, a few others. And lastly, the question I asked was, what does being integralist or meta-modernist really mean to you? And so I basically collected all the answers and put it in a word cloud, and perspectives became the sort of the major word that stands out, that was used the most. And no wonder, I think that's the beauty of being an integralist, meta-modernist, is that you actually tend to understand many different perspectives. We tend to contemplate on many different perspectives and understand each other through a different lens, even though we disagree. I think in different, we may disagree in different issues, but I think there's a recognition of that there's actually different perspectives that play here. So really beautiful to see all that. So yeah, I found this really super interesting. And so having seen that, let's go back into like, what you see, what's present here in the community, what's happening, and you can start to get a sense of like what this community holds, what kind of knowledge, wisdom, perspectives holds, right? And let's look into what's absent then. You can see what's absent in the community is different languages, different cultural setting, different people born in completely different, not just country, continent, right? We're missing a lot of places in the world, representation from a lot of places in the world. And so kind of really recognizing that what is absent here. So I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper before we move further into this. So I'll love to inquire this a little bit more in our breakout rooms. Given this so far, what do you get a sense of yourself in the community and what the community looks like? What is present and absent in your awareness? And what is your experience of deep listening to what is present and absent? So let's take a few minutes, maybe we'll go into a breakout room, and then we'll probably get about 10 minutes. Each breakout room will have 3 people, so 3 minutes each, and then at the last 1 minute to kind of complete your thoughts. So let's move into a breakout room.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Welcome back, everyone. I'd love to hear one person from each group, what came up for you and what are some of the insights that you harvested.
I nominate Shara from my group. She had a great transmission.
I'm here to say that Tom didn't listen. Let's see. I think takeaway is that all 3 of us had very different perspectives of what were present, what was absent, and what the impact on deep listening is and was. So that's interesting how the same question was experienced and we attuned in different ways, but yet we had a coherence, maybe a little bit like your slides. Out of a common background comes a prism of colors that have some resonance and relationality to each other.
Very cool. Thank you, Shara. Lorraine, I see your hand up.
Yeah, 3 of us in our group were all therapists. And we decided we don't have a lot of problem with deep listening or with being present. And for us, the unusual thing would be to put up boundaries so that we don't get flooded by what's around us sometimes, whether it's people or, just an atmosphere or whatever. So it was kind of like an inverse kind of experience, that to take care of ourselves. And of course, we started cracking up over this and thought we need to learn to be more superficial. But it was a fun discussion. I mean, we opened up to each other, and that was great.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I got to hear from Nomali. Nomali, so great to see you. It's been years I haven't talked to you.
Yeah, so great to see you, Sushant. In fact, something that I shared in our group, what was present was to say that I met Sushant many years ago, and to see him today makes me delightful. And I just noticed a joy in me that was very present in just seeing you, Sushant. So, so great.
Same here.
Yeah. In my group, really, I had 2 other wonderful women, and we shared mostly what felt present, and also sort of what felt like an absence of connection to some of us, to at least 2 of us, I think. Clarity about what seems to be a calling in the moment seems to be missing. So I think that's all I sort of remember right now. But I will say that there is there is a lot of beauty and joy, and also a lot of empathy that is needed for the other side of the coin that is also present, with a lot of brokenness and sadness, disconnection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll just jump in and say that I was in the group with Nomali, and I think the one word that we all had a different take on, but there was all of a wish for more connection, or a feeling of a lack of connection, not so much here, but in our lives, and a wish for it. And it tied into a number of themes, but the COVID pandemic and just the sense of isolation and a wish for more connection was something I think we all shared in three very different ways, but that was the common theme I felt.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah. This comes up in every group, I think. I'm part of a Meta-Aware Millennials group, and I spend a lot of time, because I live in Vancouver and there's a lot of integralists here. So we spend a lot of time, make an effort to hang out and just be, and it's not about talking theory or philosophies. It's just being with each other and just really listening to each other. And I had a GTC call right before this call, and we were kind of talking about how we showed up in the group, and the way I showed up, because I come from a culture where I have like 50 cousins and lots of family members, and we're always like in connection with each other, and I have a family channel on Viber that is always active, and and so I was showing up into our GTC community as if everybody's my family or cousin. And that bothered some people because I started teasing and making jokes and fun and all of that, right? That's how you show your love in many cultures. And yeah, so there's that hunger, and it feels universal. In fact, I just remember a few years ago, I was presenting at Vancouver, and we were doing VR headsets in Vancouver. And so I was basically presenting the VR, and people were trying it out. And I noticed something really interesting. I would say probably about 95% of the people, when they put on the headsets, they wouldn't check out something really crazy app or anything like that. All of them checked out Google Earth, and they zoomed into their childhood home. Everybody was checking out their childhood home. I thought that was very interesting. They were not interested in like really games or anything like that. That's the first thing that they checked out. So I think this going home is just so natural and built in us. And I think, and that's why I love Ram Dass's quote about we're all walking each other home. And I think part of the realization is that, we're walking each other home, but we never left home either. So this is holding both. And I think there's beauty in that. Anybody else?
I'll jump in. Not that this is a recap of our group, but what was salient for me was this notion that what's missing is the ability to not get caught up in the model of integral, the map of integral is a way to connect with people. In other words, to get that out of the way, really connect with people.
Yeah. I think that's the gift of integral has been, I think, just if you think you're enlightened, go home for a visit. Yeah, definitely. That reminds me of Buddha's saying, like, if you want to know somebody's enlightened, ask their spouse. So yeah, there's definitely that. Yeah, that's very interesting. And some of the things that came up in our group, for example, is some of the things that's absent is what Jay said, is like, if you look at the different kinds of culture, language, religion that's present, what's absent is most of the world. So we're basically integrating based on our circle of awareness, and our circle of awareness is very, very small part of what's present in the world. And I think just recognizing that, right? So being part of the millennials group, for example, there are always conversation about what millennials are, what millennials are doing now and all that. But most millennials are not in North America. They have a very different culture in Asia and other parts of the world. And so I think there is that tendency to basically universalize our perspectives. And I think, and we'll dive a little bit more into that today. So I'll read some comments.
Sushant, can I?
Yeah.
I just, as a thought exercise, some weeks ago, I ran what you said just really drew this out for me. I ran a thought exercise about who do I really know in the world? Like, what are the perspectives that are really alive for me? And like, I just use random numbers, like 100 years of living and 10 new people a day and these kinds of things. And the fraction of a percent of the human population, never mind dogs, cats, and ferns, but it's less than a single digit. I mean, if you play with the math, maybe it's a few digits. I mean, a few points, but like it's a rounding error in any data collection about what's going on or who you know or who's out there. It's fascinating. I just add that to your point. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kabir. Yeah, who we really know, right? Yeah, that's a big one. Okay. Any last minute thought before we move on?
Yeah, in our group, we did mention that like the deep listening can be available to us in circumstances like this, but it's not widely available in the real world.
Yeah, there's an intention for deep listening here, and yeah, it's often hard to take that somewhere else. So definitely, yeah.
The challenge with deep listening for me is that what can come into my awareness is not something that's readily shareable with the world or even friends, because most people play at the level of above the waterline on the iceberg, what's visible to ourselves and others. And most of reality, in this not real good metaphor of the iceberg, but is below the waterline. And it's in deep listening, Canyon does for me, open me up to below the waterline, as it were. Not sure how to articulate that well. Yeah.
What that reminds me, Larry, is Krishnamurti. He once said that listening is God, and that statement always intrigued me, and I didn't really know what that meant, but it kind of felt right in my body. And then one time I was working with Kim Barta. This is probably 2015, 2016, and so he was leading me into this process, and I just had this moment of clarity, and I dropped into my being, and I was listening him from that place, and I realized that, oh, listening is actually sacred. I can listen as going back into we're talking about archetypes at the time, so I realized the quality of listening as a king, quality of listening as a warrior, quality of listening as a lover. These are very different types of listening, and all of those are present in us. And I think it's so fascinating that we can actually drop into those. And Krishnamurti talking about listening is God became very clear that there's a sacredness when we listen. And it's about we lose that. And I think that's, for me, that's been an ongoing practice as well. I can tell you, it's very hard to maintain listening in the world of finance. It's very hard. Maybe that's why I chose finance, is because like, let's pick the hardest one and let's go with that. So thank you everyone. Let's share my screen again. So before we go into some of the presentation pieces, I think I just want to set the context of how this presentation is for me, like the way I'm coming to this presentation. So this is not an academic presentation. This is not a theory presentation. This is really about something that is very inherent in all our cultures. Well, even though we speak different languages and come from different contexts, there's something that we all our tradition, our ancestors shared, is sitting around a campfire and telling stories. So today I'm telling my story, but I'm also keen on listening to yours today. So imagine us just sitting around a campfire and telling stories. However, one of the beauty of this kind of spaces is that we're not just telling old stories, we're writing new ones, right? So that's the beauty of coming together as a group, is we can actually write new stories, and what the stories will look like. And I'm very curious to know, hear from you, and I'll share a little bit of mine today. So the context is really, I was talking to Jerry about this, is that, you know, it's hopefully my story will act like a mirror to be able for you to reflect and share your own story, and write new ones. And part of this context of writing new stories, I took it to Alaska. So I work in Alaska with the Athabascan community there in different villages. And so we're really looking at integral model. How does integral model land in those places? You know, because I can tell you, studying integral in Bay Area, California, and studying and reading Wilbur's book in Alaska or an ashram in India is very different experience, you know, because your body is learning. There are other ways of knowing that's happening, and all of that matters. So briefly, you know, some of the key takeaways, I'll just jump into some of the conclusions of the presentation, and we can unpack that a little bit. Let's see how much we can dive in. One of the things that has become very apparent to me as being part of the integral community for a very long time, I met Vernice Solimar, who ran John F. Kennedy University's integral psychology program in 2006, 2007. And I, even though I was not her student, she used to still invite me, and we used to spend hours talking about integral theory. And then finally she said one time that this is getting too deep, you have to come to grad school. And so I joined grad school and made many, many wonderful friends, and that's been a gift that keeps on giving. And as I started working, because I came from the world of finance and management consulting, technology, I was a coder before management consulting. So I came from that field, and then integral really captured my imagination in 2005, 2004. And when I graduated from 2006, 2007 from university, I packed my bags and moved to California to be with the integral community. And since then, I've been really, as I was studying integral and as I was trying to bring it into the world, I realized that having integral consciousness and actually working in an integral capacity in a project, in a company, are very two different things. Almost like the way I see them is like they're different lines of development. And oftentimes we think that, you know, because we have integral consciousness, or we are capable of complexity, we are able to do complex thing in the world, and that's not really true. There's a whole other capacity that's required. So I think I'm learning to basically differentiate between integral capacity and integral consciousness.
Sushant, can I insert a question?
Sure.
I really like the point that you made there, and I'm wondering, did you find that it's integral capacity as a specific line, or the thing that kind of I transposed the word skills and then integral capacities plural? Is that?
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, go ahead.
Yeah, I think integral capacity. So for example, I was going to talk a little bit later about this, but integral capacity in the world of finance is its own journey, as opposed to integral capacity in the world of technology or international development, for example, with Integral Without Borders is doing right now. These are different capacities in each field. So oftentimes what tends to happen is that because we have this meta perspective on different domains of knowledge, we often think that we are able to bring those into those domain easily, and it's not true. These are different capacities. So, for example, in the world of finance, Integral offers tremendous amount of insight. That's the good news. It offers so much of insights and what kind of future you can build, and the quadrants are amazing, the development lines are amazing, right? All of those are very valuable, but you have to navigate a concrete world of financial. There are policies, there are different organizations that you need to be part of, different systems that you need to be part of. These are very unsexy work. You kind of have to get your hands dirty. So, for example, in the venture capital world, the state of venture capital right now, the way it exists, is for a reason. It has been tremendously only available for elite groups and investors, right? The venture capital world, and it is because there's a lobbyist organization in Washington D.C. that maintains that. And I tried to join that. I was just trying to figure out how to join that and how to really be part of that system. And it's, the entry fee is like $10,000, and it's really out of my reach. And so, I may have this really amazing ideas about what Integral can bring to the world of finance, but to be able to manifest that in the world, I still need to navigate these systems. And those are very, concrete world, and that it's a very different capacity. And it's very much, for most people, it's not very appealing at all, I've found. And but there's a joy in getting your hands dirty and kind of moving through those systems, but those are different capacities. And each field, whether it be education, for example, or consulting, or any of those fields, require your hands to be on the ground, right? So I would say there are different integral capacities as a line, depending on what we're talking about. So thank you for that, Kabir. So talking about culture, I'll briefly speak about the culture that I come from and why I feel very passionate about that. I think there are many cultures around the world, not all, that are capable of incorporating modernity and postmodernity and beyond into it. It's not a straight line that we move from pre-modern, modern, postmodern, and then integral or meta-modern. I think there's a lot more complexity. It's more of a dance than a straight line. And we often talk about social innovation, cultural innovation. I think one of the things that I'm proposing here is, like, at least some of the cultures that I'm familiar with and where I come from, transformation of those cultures are embedded in the cultural practices itself. It has this capacity to renew itself. And the culture that I come from, obviously, is very specific. Even in the Nepali context, I come from a Newar tribe, which is basically have integrated Buddhism and Hinduism into our culture. So I'll speak a little bit more about that here in a bit. And lastly, I think deepening of cultural tradition nurtures conditions for transformation. I think this is another way of saying, we are so much familiar with transcend and include. We always talk about transcend and include. I'm proposing that, transcend and include is maybe one way to do it, but there's also deepen and transcend. When we deeply understand a tradition, its languages, its protocols, its myths, its way of being, when we start digging in, there comes a time when we are deeply embedded in it, but we also create something of our own. And this has been my journey. This is something that I struggled a lot as I was studying Integral and being in this journey, is who am I? Because I moved to the United States when I was fairly young, so I had not really fully formed my worldviews and my ideas and my identity at that time. So I knew that I did not want it to be a Nepali in America. I wanted to be a Nepali American, right? So I wanted to bring those two together. I wanted to have roots, also I wanted to have wings, and that's been an ongoing journey for me. And so I feel in my own experience and my own journey that there's a way to deepen and transcend. So I can be a traditionalist, but I can be an integralist as well. I can be a modernist as well. So the way I kind of, if somebody asks me what's my tradition, I kind of say that I'm a self-transforming traditionalist, meaning that, I recognize the shadow and light of my culture, and it's not about being just traditionalist and not being an integralist, right? It's being all of it. And so there's a lot more complex dance that happens. So, so this is something that I practice within myself. Like every year, I have this practice at the end of the year. I do this practice of like, what is what is present in my awareness and what is absent? When I talk about an issue, a social issue, or anything, basically, where am I coming from? What informs my perspectives? What informs my capacity? And so I do this exercise of almost like taking an inventory of what is my circle of awareness and what is my capacity. And so, I kind of have mapped out my own journey of what are the different skills and different places that I've lived and different perspectives I've gained. For example, when I was at university, I had a host parent. And so every time there was holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, I would go and live with my host parents. And my host parents were African American, church-going African American people. That's a culture that I was not familiar with at all. And what I got to see in that family, in that culture, in that church, really opened my heart in ways that I would not have opened otherwise if I had not really lived there, right? So there's all our life experiences basically dictates or brings forth what we need to integrate. And that's beautiful. That's our journey. That's our own story. And to recognize that, I have a beautiful journey and I am not aware of so many other things in my life that other person might be aware of. I think it's holding both. So this has been a really helpful practice for me. So I invite you to just do like a mini sort of your own practice around this. When you form your thoughts, your perspectives, what are some of the things that's informing that? We looked at the demographic survey a little bit, and you saw many things that's missing there, right? Gender is missing, big one. It's an incomplete sort of survey on its own, right? And that's the point of the survey, is that there's a lot of things absent in it as well. And so, so it's really helpful to kind of take a step back and then think about, what is my circle of awareness? What is my capacity? In fact, one of the things that really stayed with me with Suzanne's work has been, in 2013, Suzanne you wrote a paper for Integral Theory Conference, which you talked about integral good news, and you said that whatever feels authentic is not universal, and that really stayed with me, because I think that's oftentimes that what happens is that even in our own awakening, even in our own journey, we kind of get a glimpse of something that's really valuable, that's really embodied, and it feels very authentic. And because it feels authentic, we tend to think that it should feel authentic for everybody else. And I think there is that sort of awareness of recognizing that within ourselves. And I'll speak a little bit more of that because I've been on both sides of this. So maybe we'll just take 6 minutes in the breakout room to just think about and just kind of share with our friends here, what are some of the circle of awareness and capacities that we bring forth when we think about our lives or a perspective or an issue. Welcome back. We're just kind of chatting in our group about how it becomes very apparent that, our circle of awareness and capacity excludes or doesn't really include a whole lot of things in our lives. That is very important. So I was just kind of sharing that, some of the really important issues of our country in the United States, abortion, Roe v. versus Wade, African-American issues, all that, right? I actually have very little knowledge of. So I maintain a folder with like different issues in an alphabetical order, and every time I learn something, I go there and write it down, right? And it becomes very apparent that how little actually I know about these things. I'm curious. We don't have to go everybody, but I'm just curious if if somebody's really called to share what came up for you.
You know what strikes me a little bit, Sushant?
Yeah.
Is in our group, and it's interesting, we went back to the same group, but how people here operate on this subtle plane, rather than being lost in the gross realm without direction, that there feels to be more coherence and circular awareness among people in this group than I would expect. Because it struck me that they're drawing from all the different facets in order to self-author what wants to emerge. And that's kind of neat. Of course, in 6 minutes, there wasn't enough time to do it collectively.
Yeah.
But individually, just the awareness of the subtle, how much more that fills in spaces on the circle and makes available depending upon what we want to do. So
yeah,
that's what struck me in that exercise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom. Yeah. I just saw a couple of questions there, so I'll respond. Hello, you said, are you talking about deepening our own cultural traditions or deepening into other cultural traditions? I would say both, but with a nuance of like, it's oftentimes really hard to understand, deepen ourselves, other traditions, because it's a pretty tall order, right? Because oftentimes, language is the key to really understand the culture, and it takes time to learn all that. So it depends on what's available for you in terms of what your capacities are to dedicate your time and effort or your passion. All of that matters. For me, it has been really trying to understand American context. I feel like it took me 10 years to really get a sense of what the United States is all about, and I still don't know a lot of things here, and it's constantly surprised. I had the fortune of living in New York. I actually lived in Alabama when I first came here. I lived in Texas, New York, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, California, Pacific Northwest, and now Vancouver. So and every time I've kind of lived in those places, I've been always amazed like how culturally different are while people are being the same as well. So when to me, politics was not a thing that I was really attracted to until Trump presidency came around. And one of the gift of Trump presidency for me has been to really identify my own political awareness and come to my own political awakening and growing up there. So in 2006, 2007, I was living in Virginia and very fascinated by Obama, rise of Obama. And I went to work for his campaign. First, I moved to California, and I always identified as liberal, but I had not really thought about what that really meant for me. And then I moved to California, and I went to Berkeley to join the campaign, and I met a bunch of liberals, and then I realized, oh, maybe I'm not liberal. No, liberal is different here. So it's one of those things, so it depends. I think it depends on what we encounter in our lives and what we're able to do. So it's been a long journey for me to even identify what integral politics mean for me. It oftentimes when we read the book Integral Politics, it's kind of clear, right? United States of America, it's very clear if you look at this stasis model. But I think what it really means for me, it's been an ongoing thing. It's been really a challenging inquiry to find answers to. Elo, does that make sense? What you're, yeah, okay. Thank you for that question. I'll share my screen again. If you
Go ahead, the question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm thinking, hearing you talk, Sushant, I'm thinking how much more aware you are of North American culture than I am, because I'm so steeped in it. That even if you've seen how we divide up in different subcultures, it would be kind of interesting. I don't know, this may not be the time, but to hear you or friends from other countries, just, how do we look? How are we different?
Yes.
Like, what is it that we can't see, or that I can't see, that I take for granted? And I was aware when you were talking about a huge family and how the great and also obligatory parts of it, and also the connectedness and how different that is from the individualism in the US. So I just want to bring up those points.
Yes, Joanne, that's such a big topic to discuss for sure, because I think there's a lot, anybody who's lived in other countries, speak other languages, can basically have a lot to share. The light and shadow of United States becomes very apparent. There's many good things that I feel like Americans are not really aware of. For example, just the simple fact that United States and Canada share such a long border without conflict is a major deal in the human history, and we take it for granted, right? When I cross the border, I think about that every time. I've traveled many countries with my Nepali passport. I've traveled as a permanent resident of the United States, and I've traveled as American citizen. Those are very different experiences when you travel. And one of the things that I did was, in my 20s, I really wanted to understand the history of the United States and what it comes from. And I was very fascinated by Benjamin Franklin. So I used to read a lot about him, and then I discovered that he was a Freemason. And Freemasonry has been around for many, many years, and the modern Freemasonry was really reinvented by Francis Bacon. And I was very fascinated by that. So I joined Freemasonry to really understand what the United States is about. And I joined in Virginia. So I received the same training as George Washington did, because they maintained the rituals and the teachings and all of that. And it was a fascinating insight into what the United States was. So every time I look at the Senate and House, how they operate, it's all adapted from how the King Solomon ran his temple in those ancient times. It's a replica of that, right? How it's governed, basically. It's very fascinating stuff. America has very fascinating history, and to go back to your inquiry, Joanne, there's a lot of things that I feel. I mean, it's an endless conversation here, but United States do not really recognize its own light and shadows in many ways. So So I'll give a small story. In 80s and 90s, in Nepal, the Maoists was on the rise. The Maoists were sort of an fringe group who were unhappy with the mainstream governance of Nepal being a kingdom, and the prime ministers and everybody sort of in the pockets of Indian politicians. In fact, many political parties started in India at a university, in Johar, JHU as they call it, Jawaharlal Nehru's University in Delhi. And so this group really started getting more and more powerful in the 80s and 90s, and finally overthrew the monarchy in 2008, and Nepal became the youngest republic, adapting some of the elements of United States Constitution. Very fascinating story about that is that the Maoist leaders were using CIA guns that was used to fund Tibetan revolution, because CIA was funding Dalai Lama's brother back in the day, and they had this huge stories of guns. And US was involved in that. And I don't know the mechanics of how that got transferred, but US has, Nepal is really a small player in the world stage, and they still have all of these things going on there. And it's amazing to see, there's a book called, I think, The Hidden Empire, and US is a hidden empire. They got, it's more bigger than what we see out there. And yet it's got its impact, it's involved in everybody's politics, and there's all kinds of battle being fought behind the scenes. All of that is happening. And I think, it's important to kind of recognize that. And the reason, I also understand why many Americans don't know this, because they don't have the need to. It's the big dog, small dog sort of dynamics, right? For growing up in Nepal, I'm very much aware of the West, India, and China, because we had to. We're affected by Indian politics and Chinese politics. India tries to play big brother to Nepal, and Nepali people don't like it, and then India cuts off the resources, and there's all kinds of things that happens over. And so we kind of grow up having to understand these dynamics. For most Americans, that's not the case. It's not really a crisis at hand on an ongoing basis that you have to really learn about other countries influencing in that big way. Obviously, there's social media now, China, Russia, all of those things are there, but in other countries, it's a lot more survival, right? I grew up in late 80s when the first I heard of India was they were basically cutting our supplies, and then how that lands in a young person's body, and how I formed my worldview about who India is to Nepal, right? All of that I had to rethink and rebuild and know the reality of what was happening. So it takes a lot, and most Americans don't. On one hand, they don't need to do that. On the other hand, because of that, they don't know a lot of things, right? So it's important to be in conversation with people who speak other languages and who come from other cultures. I think that's probably the best way to just do, is being aware of what's missing in my awareness and circle of friends, how many languages are represented in my circle of friends. Those are very important questions to inquire about to really understand the United States. Any other thoughts?
Yes. Yeah. I was just looking for the hands up button, couldn't find it, but I've lost my train of thought just a little bit. But first of all, just when you spoke prior to the question, one of the things that I noticed was absent, and maybe not entirely, but was gender. And so I went and I put in the chat links to a really excellent podcast about gender that I recently listened to, that takes this conversation further into that domain. And while I was there, I realized you were also speaking about politics, and the same show did an episode interviewing the leader of the loudest platform of fundamentalist Christian view and politics in the US. And it was such a foreign viewpoint to me. And it was so beautiful to see this way this gentleman brought out their perspective, or his perspective, and nested it in our context. And then the comment I wanted to make also was the speaking of integral capacities and where they come from as part of a broader economic inquiry into our global wisdom base. The fact that you're from Nepal brought in, as you said, brought you to this inquiry of diverse actors and their natures and their motivations and their histories, and then also reserved when you got to reinvestigate those territories. And as you say, those are as an American, I would have to work to get to that. I'd first of all have to know there was a place to look for. And so that to me is really, these are the important questions about how do we understand the economics of intelligence, the economics of wisdom, the economics of question, and how do we find these blind spots? So thank you for that. That was really great answer.
Thank you, Kabir, because this is such an important, because pretty much all the the political issues, I mean, especially the capital versus socialism debates, right? Like that's kind of outdated, because it's sort of, it depends on the context that we're talking about. And I think, immigration debate, for example, is a big deal, right? And I've been on a journey from coming to the United States as a student, as a teenager, student, going to Alabama, because I thought I'll find my sweet home Alabama there. I only lived there for 4 months. I moved out right away, and from that time to becoming a citizen, it was a 15-year-old journey. It was 15 years of journey from being an immigrant to becoming a citizen. And during that time, I had to navigate the immigration system. I had to navigate the work visas and employee and all the thing that happens, and how much of that you get to see a very different side of United States in those, because you are in a very disempowered place, right? Because once, especially in the work visa, for example, you are only allowed to stay in the country as long as the work visa is sponsored by a company, and because you are under them, you are basically in a vulnerable space in terms of how much you get paid, how much you have to work, all of that stuff. And so so the immigration debate that oftentimes that happens is like, I feel my personal experience has been like, we're not talking about a whole lot of important things. It's always surprising to me what we give priority to. These are very important debates, but we're always talking about the southern border and should we let people in or not and all that. And then there are millions of people here in the United States who are trying to figure out, like myself, how do we actually stay in the country? That is not really talked about. And so oftentimes I kind of look at the news and then I'll be like, okay, we're not talking about some of the important issues here. So there's very partial, the news are very partial. So I think it's really important to dig in a little bit more in any issue. And again, it goes back to the circle of awareness, right? I'm aware of the immigration thing because I am an immigrant, right? And I'm not aware of abortion issues because I'm not a woman, and that's my blind spot. I kind of have to figure out how to bridge that, and so it depends, I think. Yeah. So I'll continue. Thank you for all your sharing. This has been really wonderful and rich so far. So I'll keep continuing. So So just a small story. I love to tell the story because this is such a important part, moment in my life. So about 12, 13 years ago, I was part of a spiritual community in California, in India, and I was training to become a monk because I thought that's the way to serve the world. And, I, as one does in your 20s, like kind of traveled to India, went to ashram, drop acid, all of those things. Went to live with shaman in Peru, all of that stuff. And so I was, and one time I was in an ashram in India. I was in a program. I was there for 3 months, I think. And so there was a meditation program that was happening. And part of the program was, there was one day where we had to write all our stories, everything that has happened in our life, and then share that with somebody else in the room. And I was a little bit arrogant because I just learned about Integral and I read all the Wilbur books, and I was very familiar with the lingo, and I kind of had this really this zeal about Integral, saying that, oh my God, I found something that's really amazing, and this is going to change the world, and this is going to be amazing, and everybody needs to know about this. And so I was in that phase of my life, and I was as I was writing the story of my life in my notebook, and I was looking around the room, and I was like, oh my God, like there's so many brilliant people in this room. There's like professors from universities, psychologists, and all of these people. And I was thinking that I hope I will be paired with one of these brilliant people, and I'll be able to share my story, and they'll give me amazing reflections. But unfortunately, at that time, and fortunately, looking back, I was paired with a local farmer who didn't speak English, and who only spoke Hindi. And because I come from Nepal, I understand Hindi a little bit, not fluent to speak, but I understand. So I was sad that I was like, oh, this sucks. He's not going to be able to say anything about my life. He's not going to give me any life-changing insights or advice. So hopefully I'll get through this really quickly, and I'll be paired to somebody else. And I was blown away what he was able to see. I was sharing my life story in English, and he reflected back to me in Hindi, and I was blown away. He read me like a book. He saw everything through me. I was blown away. It just did not make sense how he was able to see what he was able to see. He didn't know the developmental lines. He didn't know the quadrants. So how the hell did he know all these things about me? It did not make sense to me. And that was really a humbling moment. It was my Ram Dass moment. If you remember Fierce Grace, Ram Dass talks about meeting his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and Bhagwan Das, his friend who takes him to Neem Karoli Baba, lays flat on the ground to touch Neem Karoli Baba's feet, and then Ram Dass just stands there, right? And then Neem Karoli Baba, the guru, calls him like, come over here. You're thinking about your mother, right? And Ram Dass gets like, how did he know? I was thinking about my mother as I was driving here, but there's no way he could have known. It was that kind of moment for me. It's like, oh, how could he have known all of that? It doesn't make sense. But he could see this. So that was really a important moment for me to shift from, oh, there are other ways of knowing in my own culture that I was not aware of. There are other ways of learning, other ways of understanding. There are other ways of really feeling others' presence. And it's not about running somebody through a quadrant and really analyzing their developmental models and typologies and all of that stuff, right? So it was a really good learning experience for me, and a big blow to my ego at that time. And I'm very grateful. So every time I talk about Integral, and I talk about any kind of sharing about my culture, I always remember him. I don't know his name now, but yeah, he's been a big part of my life. He's been really a true teacher in that one little hour that he gave me. Very influential. So I've been grateful. So going back to one of the things that we're talking about, so integral consciousness and integral capacity are different lines of development. Obviously there's a lot of research to be done here, but I'm just kind of putting together my own understanding around how integral capacity is a domain specific. Kabir, that's why I put domain specific there, is because I think it's each domain you start out at early stage and you kind of move quickly if you have sort of the other capacities, but it is domain specific. Being an integralist in finance, you kind of start at earlier stages and you kind of move through the stages. So I have some working theories around that. I'd love to share as I tease this apart a little bit more, and have some really concrete ideas and data to back it up and all that. But I've kind of, in my own working, so in my own integral story, I've been kind of saying that integral capacity moves through different stages. I very much recognize myself as an integral impulsive, an integral universalist, meaning that I felt like I had discovered something really magical in integral theory, and that's what's going to change the world, and everybody should know about it. And that was my 20s, and as I sort of started working in the world again, I began to be a little bit more cautious about what integral can actually do in the world. And it was more context specific, and I started calming down about my talking about integral in every conversation. It was like it was like Trump. We talked about Trump every conversation, or Bitcoin, and everybody talks about Bitcoin. It was one of those things. There was a time in my life when all I talked about was integral theory. So I began to be a little bit more cautious about what integral is. And then as I started learning more and trying to apply it more in Alaska, in Nepal, I started becoming a little bit more sensitive towards local context of what integral can do and what it can bring. And I started listen more. I started becoming more aware of what's absent in my own awareness and capacities, and my circle. So listening has been a really good practice. And where I'm at right now is I feel like there's an interpenetrative integral capacity, which is learning the theory and trying to apply it in any domain, any field, but also, and transforming the field, but also the field transforms the theory. So there's sort of a dance between integral theory, integral way of being, integral philosophy with a domain. So for example, I work in finance and technology. What's an integral contribution? What in the world of technology, for example, right? That's very interesting. And I feel like there's a lot that integral can bring to the world of technology, and we need it. We really, really need it. But there is integral also, as integralists, we also need to learn a lot about what's happening in the ground of technology. What's happening in the AI, and what's happening in machine learning and blockchain. All of these things that are going to impact our lives are already impacting our lives. It's going to impact our lives even more in the next few years, and even more after that. It's really important to have that sort of interpenetrative, generative conversation with specific domains. So I'm sort of, this is obviously not an academic presentation. This is more or less an integral story that I'm trying to bring forth with some data and with some facts as I work on this more.
Sushant, can I interrupt again?
Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to reflect that one of the things that you're saying to us, and I think this is so important, particularly in integral communities, is we don't call it dogma theory, right?
We don't call it what, sorry?
Dogma theory.
Right.
The actual word integral, like, really brings us back to listening as God, right?
Yeah.
Really, what's in front of you? What are the things, the objects of your awareness? What's in your awareness circle right now? Yeah. And what's your capacity to integrate? And that's, you're saying something really beautiful and really important. Yeah. So thank you.
In fact, for me, the journey of learning integral has been journey of love, because I think what integral does do for us is that we get to see more because of integral. In fact, when I just remember this story about when I was waiting for my flight at San Francisco airport going to Peru, I had a camera and I was just thinking about it, and something landed in me. I realized that, because I was very much interested in photography at the time, and whenever I take a look at an object through my camera, it grounds me. It was a meditative practice for me. It grounds me. It sort of settles me. I see things that I've not seen before. You see some of the pictures in my background. I took those pictures, and each of those pictures, what I felt like was, it wasn't just me looking at those objects. Those objects were looking back at me, and there was this sort of a relationship with the object through my camera. And in the same way, integral has been that for me. It's not just about, analyzing an issue or an object. It's actually deepening our relationship, intimacy with that object. And I love this quote from, it must be from Buddhism, I think, or Zen, which basically says that enlightenment or awakening is intimacy with 10,000 things, and there's the capacity of integral embodiment that makes us so intimate with what we're engaging with. And that's, to me, that's lovely about integral. It doesn't show up at all times for everybody, obviously. That's why there are enough people criticizing integral as well. But I think the way I always phrase my approach is, it's both appreciative and critical perspectives on integral theory, right? There's a lot to be appreciated here as well. And just quickly moving to the second, cultures can incorporate modernity and post-modernity and beyond. The way I've been sort of working with this is, I think what has happened is that a lot of the cultures and the knowledge systems have been bulked as pre-modern. Really sort of the Enlightenment philosophers, I think Hegel was the first one to do it, probably, from what I understand, that all of these cultures are quote unquote pre-modern, and then there's Western Enlightenment and modernism and sort of so forth, right? That to me is, it's a lot more complex than that. I think the tradition does not stay stagnant for a while. For one, for example, when I was in Peru, I was visiting these ruins, this remarkable, construction of these massive stones and walls that was built. It was very amazing to watch. You almost get a sense of not just the architecture, but the interiority of that architecture when you look at those. It's really beautiful. Beautiful to look at. And then I was traveling with a shaman at that time, and the shaman took us to his home, and I realized in a room he had all these charts on yoga and chakras and all of these things, and it was remarkable to see that traditions are working, kind of learning from each other all the time. Tradition does not stay stagnant, and I think just bulking all the tradition into pre-modern, or even saying that there's our indigenous culture. Indigenous cultures are not one. There are many different indigenous cultures. In Nepal, there are many different languages. There are many different religions and subsets of religions and cultures and all of that, right? It's a complex world. And so to me, I think we really have to listen more into how these cultures are. And to me, like saying that pre-modern, modern, postmodern, and integral or meta-modern as a sort of a linear progression does not make sense. I think there's a constant interchange between these, and looks more like a complex, like a neural network than a straight line. It's a lot more. There's a lot more exchange happening now than ever before, and I think we're constantly learning how to be modern in this world. And I think I know a little bit about African modernism movement. There's a whole literature on African modernity. I'm definitely aware of Indian sort of challenges to Western modernity. There's a lot of academic scholars emerging out of Indian modernism, and the West itself has critiqued modernism in terms of Bruno Latour's work, or there are others who talk about alternate modernism and all of that. So there's a lot going on that I oftentimes feel like the integral model almost does not go deep into what's happening even in the pre-modern or modern world. And so, but the challenge of all that is that because the economic center is in the West right now, and hugely influential because of the military and all the geopolitics and all that. So a certain narrative stays on the forefront and other narratives starts to go behind, right? Whatever United States in this current era says, that becomes the dominant narrative because of the power and the economic sort of incentives. So there's a lot intertwined with the economic incentives as well. So there's a bunch of stories that I can share around that. So for example, in Nepal, there's been a movement of Christianizing Nepal. There's been churches flourishing in Nepal whose mission is to basically build a church at 10 minutes walking distance all over Nepal. And if you Google Joshua Project, there's a data-centric approach to Christianizing the world, which basically they have collected all the data of every parts of the world, going down to different villages, different towns, and they have the data how many are remaining to be Christianized, right? So it's and what does that do is that because they have resources and time and resources to export that narrative, the other countries becomes the recipient because they're still at a different stage of their development or different economic reasons or all of that. So there's a lot more going on than just the dominant social discourse. There's economics involved, there's geopolitics involved. There's a lot going on. So I think it's important to consider all of that, and to recognize that not all of that can be in our circle of awareness, right? And so this is where which is really close to my heart around, is we in the integral community, we always talk about waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. Very important parts of our practice. I think what's needed is, it's not just growing up, cleaning up, waking up, showing up. It's also teaming up. It's really important to be in relationship with other people with other narratives and team up, so to speak. Third, transformation and social innovation practices are embedded in cultures. What I mean by this is culture do not stay stagnant. They have, a lot of rituals and a lot of practices built in it that it sort of regenerates itself. We talk about regenerative economies and regenerative cultures all the time now, but that's been a practice of many, many cultures. Not all, but many, many cultures have practice of regeneration in them. So, for example, sun is a major deity in most cultures, has been throughout ancient days, and sun really represents the culture. So, for example, in the culture that I come from, every morning we worship sun, right? The reason we do that is because sun represents our culture. Sun is ancient at the same time and new with every sunrise. That's how culture looks at themselves, is that we are ancient, but we renew ourselves for every generation. There are different traditional protocols through which the older generation, the elders in the community, pass on the knowledge to the younger generation, and they recreate or revitalize the tradition for that time and space. And many cultures have that. That has been mostly lost because of the colonization, and that's a whole nother conversation, what has happened because of that. But many cultures do have in them how to regenerate themselves for the new community, for the new time, so to speak. So which I find really interesting. And there are different rituals. Rituals are looked upon at one time, not anymore, but at one time in an integral community, it was looked upon as this purple stays and this earlier stays of magical and all. There's a lot going on there. Many of these rituals are what I like to call full spectrum or full stack. They have concrete, subtle, and causal level in them. So, for example, my sister-in-law is a Native American woman from Shawnee tribe in Montana. So I've often spent a whole lot of time with her family. I've been to different rituals, and I was once in a Peyote ceremony in Oklahoma with a family. And so this Peyote ceremony became such an important part of my experience in my life, because the context of that ceremony was there was a 13, 14-year-old boy who had suicidal thoughts, who was depressed, didn't want to talk to his parents. He reached out to his uncle and said that I'm having this suicidal thought, I need some help. So his uncle put together this Peyote ceremony for him. And I happened to be invited there at that time. So I went there and I was blown away by their practice. It was an amazing experience. So the Peyote ceremonies really began with, it alternated from telling stories to music, chanting, taking peyote, dancing, all of that. And during that time, what was happening was that, so the elders in the circles, we all sat around a fire, and the elders were telling stories about how was it growing up, what were they experiencing when they were colonized, how were they dragged to residential schools, how all that experience, and what do they see. And the women were very empowered. They were sharing their stories about how is it to be a woman in that culture, in that time. So there was all this amazing exchange of knowledge that was happening, and there was dance and music, and the boy whose this ritual was called for was integrating all of that. So what I saw there was, yes, it's a concrete sort of collective ritual that was happening, but it also had this subtle and causal layer to it. It was this full stack, full spectrum rituals. And oftentimes, cultures have those full stack rituals in them, embedded in them. And oftentimes with time, passes of time and all that, we tend to forget, and it just becomes this ritual. But when we start to dig in and understand, and especially work with somebody who knows the context of that ritual, there's a lot going on. The myths, the stories are embedded in those rituals, and that's it almost works like a vehicle to transport this from one generation to another. And so that's quite common as we dig into it. And I've been always fascinated by those rituals.
Well, thank you, Sushant. So we're getting close to our time here.
Okay.
We will stick around for some more discussion. So maybe if there's anything else you wanted to share, we can catch that in a few minutes. But
yeah, sounds good. So I'll just quickly move through this. I just need 2 minutes, I think.
Okay.
So briefly, oftentimes, like, this is what I was talking about, rituals, and yes, we do need integral theory, we do need all of these different models, but there's other ways to look at how social innovation, how to understand cultures and all of that, right? So briefly, I probably will not talk about this now, but this one important thing that I love to talk about is, so the left picture is in a place in Tiruvannamalai in India, and we are all meditating in front of the Tiruvannamalai hill, which is a sort of a really important place in Hinduism. On the right, you'll see, this was Cusco, Peru, when I was there. Each of these cultures consider that place to be the center of the universe. Very interesting stuff. And so we all have our own universalism. We, as an integralist, we are all, we tend to be universalist in our own way. As a traditionalist, we tend to be universalist in all ways. So I think it's important to recognize what's universalist, what kind of tendency do we have around our knowledge, our perspectives, and are we universalizing it? Like Suzanne said, whatever feels authentic might not be universal. So I think I'll live there, and then just leave with this Sri Aurobindo's quote about, by our stumbling, the world is perfected. So it's not about being perfect. It's about stumbling with each other and stumbling together. I think that's the whole point of this. So thank you so much. It's been really rich. I'd love to continue the conversation. There's so much to hear. All of us have so much rich stories here. And I think the beauty of this, I'd like to thank San Diego Integral organizers inviting me here. It's such a rich place because, like I said, this is not just about telling old stories. This is about writing new ones, and writing new stories are really, really important right now. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sushant. That's just beautiful. And again, for me, it just opens up new territory for me, and I think in a way that again, especially your kind of heart-centered approach to that is just so beautiful. So thank you so much, and we appreciate you being here. And if people are interested in getting more information, do you have a website or something that we can post here in the chat? You want to type in your website in the chat there then? So then so again, everyone, thank you so much, Sushant. And at this point, let's see if Tom could jump in for just a minute and just give us a little bit of a taste of what's coming up here at San Diego Integral. So Tom, you want to take a minute or two?
Sure. So on October 8th, you already heard Jerry mention it before, we have Kim Barta coming to San Diego Integral. And if you've seen him present, he's really quite skillful in presenting. And his presentation is going to be shadow patterns, hidden dynamics of the unconscious mind. We sure can use a lot of that anytime. And then a couple weeks later, we're going to meet at 10 o'clock in the morning to make it a little easier on our European colleagues, so they're not up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And that one's going to be J.P. Jokhanan, A Theory of Everything in 3 Easy Steps. So that's going to be really good for people fairly new to integral theory, because it's going to, he's going to elucidate some of the key points. And then one other thing I need to mention to the group is the What the Future Integral Conference in Sedona is November 3rd to 6th, 2022. And they're keeping it to 140 people. And we're going to meet at the Poco Diablo Resort in Sedona. I really think this is going to be a special conference that they're probably going to repeat. So if you can make it, I highly recommend getting there, because it's going to have some of the integral living room quality in Boulder. I just think it's going to be rich. But if you can't make it, I just noticed on the website today, they're going to have a live stream access you can purchase. But I would try to go. I think this is going to be very special. So without further ado, I'll let Jerry finish.
Okay, so this ends the formal presentation part of the meeting. So if those of you who want to drop off now, thank you for coming. Appreciate having you here and participating. But we'll keep the room open for, we'll see how it goes, up to an hour, and just continue with any questions for Sushant. I think Sushant has agreed to stick around for a little while. And any questions for Sushant would be great, or just observations, discussions. It's just an informal time, and I'll try to sort of lightly facilitate. If you would, you do have a comment or anything, again, you can use the raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen, or it's under reactions, and then we'll try to have people go in order. So I don't know, anybody want to kick off with a question or observation? Okay, Joanne.
Sushant, oh, where are you? You're still here, right?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I was thinking, there is such a huge field now, implications for the future and directions for humanity in terms of AI and machine learning, and, looking at Elon Musk and Zuckerberg's Meta. And I'm thinking that you must have all kinds of thoughts about that. So would you like to talk for an hour about that?
Yeah. Yes. Is there any specific, because there's so much to explore there.
What do you find most compelling?
I'm not on Facebook, for example. Like, that's not something that I do. I don't use Microsoft or Apple, for example. I use Linux, which is an open source system. So I also have a set of like technological values, for example. So I try to practice that in my own life. So open source is a big deal for me. Open source systems, Linux, those kind of things. And I totally understand not everybody can do that. So there is, so Elon Musk and Meta, I'm not a big fan of Meta. I loved when I was in college when Facebook started. It was amazing. I made so many friends, it was amazing. But somehow, I don't know, late 2010, after that, I think something went into very weird spaces, and I canceled my account in 2014, 15, I think. I used to be active on Facebook before that. And right before the Cambridge Analytica thing happened with the data stealing and all that stuff, right? So not a big fan of that. I think it's very detrimental to human psyche. We don't know its impact that we're going to, it's especially in children. We all grew up when there was no internet in this form. So we've been fortunate in that way. But yeah, Elon Musk his Neuralink project, for example, which basically is trying to put chip in our brain, which is hilarious to me, where people said for years that Bill Gates is trying to put chip in our brain, and he got so much shit about it. And then Elon Musk came right out and said, I'm going to do that, and everybody's praising him. That's hilarious to me. And I think there's almost this sort of, this is where developmental and model and multi-perspectival ideas become very important, because Elon Musk is coming from he's an important sort of entrepreneur of our generation, definitely. He has accomplished something really remarkable, totally get it. But when it comes to human psyche and consciousness, it's not his area of awareness. It's not his domain of expertise. And he's moving to that. That's what I feel very challenging about. The transhumanism movement requires all of these different perspectives to be in conversation with each other. But because people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others are so much wealth, they are pushing their narrative out. And because they have money, they are able to fund technologies with those narratives. That's why finance is so important for me, because finance is about funding the right narrative, funding the right future as well. So I see both. I see it can be quite challenging especially when Neuralink has already moved into experimenting with monkeys now. So they're going to do human trials, I think, in a few years. So it's going to be challenging. I think we are looking at transhumanism to be almost universalized by the experts and achiever mindset. That's what we're seeing. Lots to talk about.
Thank you. I think so. I know Shara's up, but Tom had texted. He had something. Tom, did you want to go? Do you have a question or to kick off a little bit?
I'll wait for Shara to go. Okay.
Shara, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sushant, I think I'm most touched by the love that you're able to communicate in a very difficult topic. You're shining a light onto some blind spots without provoking response. And I don't know how to do that. And to the point where it's like, are we missing where you've even shone the light? I'm aware that what we center at the beginning is perspectives. What's demonstrated is that we have very, very few perspectives. And how do we listen to what's absent and keep growing in that way? And how do we do that individually? And how would we do that as a movement? And I know to me, I can get angry, so I'm so in love with your lack of anger, because I need that reference point, because I really try to bring forward learning about narratives that are not centered in order to develop. And in the worlds I move in, I usually have people roll their third eye at me. So, and it can be difficult. And, I was saying I'm part of an organization that's working very hard to increase the scope of teachers and perspectives that are centered. And a wise colleague with understanding humility of what he was saying said, I preferred it before it became diverse. So there's this need, and yet this preference that I can even identify myself and comfort with my fairly non-diverse world. So what I so appreciate and even find maybe hope is you're identifying a developmental line that speaks maybe to integral meta-modern values. Like I think we all want to be at the top. So in order to be at the top, to really keep developing, we have to develop the humility to decentralize our authentic universality. And that might be something that can motivate us past our preference for sameness. You know, I'm hopeful for that, because I do a lot of driving, so I listen to a lot of podcasts from this world, and it's like, you know, it's I mean, it's not like we made much social progress when the people who are influencing me, and I don't even know where they are. I don't even know how to like open it up, but you're giving us a motivation. You know, we need to team up and to see, so we know what we're talking about when we reduce different cultures to different narratives. So I'm just kind of curious where your response is to that. And maybe I'm also curious, like, what do you see moving in that direction? Do you see movement in that direction? And how is it emerging, and what's causing it?
When you say movement in that direction,
movement in the direction of actually having, let's say, the meta-modern movement have motivation to truly learn what has not been centered.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So let me go back to your earlier thing about anger. I think anger is a really useful tool. I think it's important to be angry. How we express it is obviously is the key. But about me not being angry, you know, it's one of those, if you ask my partner, she would probably say something entirely different. So there's always that. But it's been a heartbreaking journey for me personally as well, just trying to figure my life out in the United States. So a lot of I think love comes from being able to heal, having the community to heal, having the relationships to be able to heal those hurts and pains. So there's definitely that. But also, I think what's trying to emerge is, if we really listen, I think as an integralist or meta-modernist, we're very adept and skilled at being magicians. We can take something and transform it into something else. You know, we're very good at that. But I think what's needed is being a lover. And what does that mean, being a lover? I think we need to, and this, I'm speaking from a practice. For several last few years, I've been working with a teacher on the masculine heart. I was part of men's group for a very long time, and in men's group, usually everybody reads the book, you know, the Jungian book about king, warrior, lover, magician, all of that. You know, Iron John, all of this book are very common in men's group, and we kind of tend to understand what those attributes of masculine are and try to embody it. But I think there's something more and deeper happening, which is opening of the masculine heart. And so I work with a teacher specifically on that, and what I've realized is that, you know, our relationship with love matters. It's not just about who we love. Oftentimes, how can we? The question that I'm asking now, and I think it does start at home. It's not about how I love my partner or do I love my partner. It's more about how I love with my partner. So there's a sort of a different capacity that emerges when we love with others. You know, my teacher calls it the third consciousness. So whenever two people come in a relationship, there's a third consciousness that starts to emerge, and we have to nurture that third consciousness, and the third consciousness nurtures us. So there's a quality of loving that I think we need to relearn. It's not that I love something when all the criteria are met. You know, we have these different things going on, and then when all those criteria meet up, then I'm able to love. That's not what it is. I think we fundamentally have to relearn how to love. And we can speak volumes about that. What does that entail? Practice. And your last question about, do I see this kind of love or awareness emerging in integral or meta-modern? I kind of stepped back a little bit from integral and meta-modern community because I wanted to move into the world of finance a little bit deeper. and really get my hands dirty and kind of do that. So I'm not sure. Every time I do listen to a lot of podcasts and all that, there's a tremendous amount of insights coming up, and there's a lot of knowledge being generated. And I'm not sure if this kind of love is really emerging or not. Maybe I know there's a hunger, especially in the millennial crowd. There's a lot of hunger for love. I've also seen a lot of my women friends struggle with integral men in relationships. So there's a lot there to be talked about, I think. So the short answer is I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll have to dig in a little bit deeper in what's
Thank
happening.
you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Eloy.
I think Kabir was up next.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you both. And that was wonderful. And I wanted to say, I'm motivated to speak right now out of gratitude. You've got one of the things you just said reminded me, one of the most important insights to me about Integral is that I'll step a half. Suzanne, your work, thank you. If you're still here. I mean, through Suzanne's work, the stages of development really revealed to me potential depths of compassion. And it didn't mean that as I got later, or one got later, there was more depth for compassion, but looking at the first person perspective, the babies, the children, the teenagers, the community members, on and on, like all of these places are these boundless pools for compassion. That was really love and compassion is what your model, Suzanne, brought about a much deeper appreciation of in me. And I speak to that now because Sushant, it's so apparent in the way and what you've presented today. The depth of your integralism, that you are in so many ways an embodiment of integral. And when I was struck with that thought, one of the things that contrasted for me, what's absent, was how many times in this extended community I have met really incredible and remarkable people. And there was a quality of distance. And it might be more about saying more about me than them, but there was, like, with you, that doesn't, like, there's, like, I found myself wanting to say some comment about, like, you're out of my league in so many ways. And then I realized, like, no, I've felt that. I know that feeling. And that's not the feeling. This feeling here is so welcoming and so embracing. And so your embodiment of integral, I think, is really a precious example in the context of an integral group that's interested in integral. And to bring it back to the last piece, like the integral stage of conversation, the integral conversation, I should say, it's so easy for us. And I did the same thing that you described. Found it, there's the answer, there's the mountain, there's Mecca. And it's actually just the beginning. It's like at Integral, we begin this sacred journey of integrating in a way where it's compelled by our perspective, it's compelled by our growth. And so, yeah, I just wanted to thank you for being such a marvelous example and for holding our hands. There's not been 5 words you've managed to put in between any other words you've said that lost my interest. And I'm just really grateful for your presentation and your presence here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kabir. And I think that is quite common in integral community, where I've also felt very out of place. When I first came into the integral community and moved to California, I was amazed by how brilliant people are. And they were constantly talking about this framework or that book. And I was like, oh my God, at any given time, I had at least 20 books to be read. And at one point, it kind of started to fall away. And then it became like, okay, so it is about walking each other home and recognizing where, what home really is. And so it's a different quality of integrating, I think. And that's why I love our community here, because I think those kind of things are really possible to bring up in a very clear way and have a practice around it. So, yeah, thank you, Kabir. So great to be with you. I don't know who's next.
I was next, but I'm going to yield to Suzanne because I think she has a follow-up for Kabir. So I'll go after Suzanne.
Thank you. I don't have more important things to say than any of you. But what I wanted to say also out of gratitude, I sometimes feel I'm a voice in the wilderness by having critiqued Integral and the whole weird mindset and all of that. And so I was totally delighted to hear you. It took me also 15 years to become a citizen, and very reluctantly so, because I didn't want to sign the line that said you have to bear arms for the United States. That just prevented me from signing for years and years. And coming from a different culture, different languages makes a difference. English is such a universalizing kind of way of framing reality, cutting experience up in a certain way that other languages don't have. They're much richer, much more complex ways of expressing what they experience. And so I'm just glad. I really enjoyed your capacity and warmth and thoughtfulness. Thank you for bringing this to us.
Thank you, Suzanne. I feel fortunate to have been sort of many of the transmissions I've received from you over the years. There's not a week goes by that I don't think about something you said or something that you wrote. So that's been a really important part of my learning, and being part of the community and meet you, Suzanne, and you, Nomali, and be like, okay, so there are people, I can sort of be here. There's a lifeline here. And, even though I had not read all Wilbur books at that time, I felt like, okay, maybe I can survive the intellectualism of the community. And there's something in me that in my body, it drew me. I remember when I first picked up A Brief History of Everything, I read the first page and I immediately shut it down and put it back because I had this jolt of energy go through me. It was something my body called me towards Integral. And so it was easy to pack my bags and move to California, but to be part of the community and, be part of, make friends and kind of bring my own voice has been a long, long journey for sure. It's still going on. So I'm very grateful to you, Suzanne, your work.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Sushant. Great presentation. I'm kind of what I'm hearing you say is, or heard you say through this, is that there's a place for integral influence on a culture and the cultural influence on integral.
Right.
And I was wondering if you're familiar with the work of, so this covers two areas, the cultural and the financial, with the work of Saïd Alabani. And
yeah, I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, so he's got him and his wife Elsa talk about when in the work they did with spiral dynamics was always looking for what they called indigenous intelligence. They said you can't apply integral theory without bringing in the people that have the indigenous intelligence. So anyway, that I thought that might be a.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating work. Yeah, I'm familiar with his work. I love his work. His ex-wife is part of my teachers community, actually. And yeah, I've every time he produces something, like I think he was talking about Black Swan and White Swan recently. That was quite fascinating. But yeah, and you know, the indigenous intelligence, I think the thing that I also have throughout my California life, I've always, it felt like I was in the middle, like, because I was part of a spiritual community where I was talking about integral at that time, and they didn't like that very much. They didn't really understand. And I felt like I was defending integral in my tradition, and I was defending tradition in the integral community. So I kind of felt like I was always in between, because there's value in both. And yeah, so it's and I'm glad there's been a number of important books has come out recently, like Sand Talk, right?
Yes.
Jamie Wheel had been talking about some interesting stuff recently, right? So there's important books has come out in the recent years that is quite valuable. Yeah, I think Tom.
Thank you, Sushant. You know, Kabir noticed the embodiment in you. Sharon noticed how you don't offend people. And the secret ingredient you told us is the love. And how that has to be intentional in every moment in order to help the transmission. And one of the things that reminds me of the people in working with intimate couples, I'm always struck how the average couple can do 85% correct. It's the 15% wrong that becomes 80% of their state experience of the relationship. And it reminds me of Miles Kessler spoke here, and he asked us, how many negative thoughts have you had today? And, you know, we're speculating. I think I speculated 7. I was up to about 25 by the end of his talk. So the intention of love changes the message so much. It opens up so much. And it's really difficult in intimacy. In intimacy, I'm not going to catastrophize the 15%. That has to be a conscious choice to live in abundance. So it's very interesting to see how these transmissions work when they're embodied with love. And I just love that secret ingredient. I think it's right on.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like, yeah, it's been a long journey. I find a little bit awkward talking about love because it's really a learning edge for me. And it, believe it or not, like I'm Enneagram 5, INTJ, so it's a like a learning process for me. But what has also happened is, I think I've experienced like heartbreaks in my life, and that kind of changes you in a big way. All of us have experienced heartbreak. I think I've experienced like very survival, like my dad was kidnapped, and and had to deal with that situation when I was not really able to understand what was going on. I've had to travel to many places that was not ideal. So all of those life experiences I think it opens you up in different ways. Just like our bodies have capacity, whenever there are different levels of pain in different parts of our body, the body only focuses on the one part, right, which is the biggest pain. I think in many ways, when we experience some drastic thing happen in our life, it starts to put things in context. Of course, there's trauma and all of that needs to be healed, but I think there's definitely that. And to come to place, I think it is an intention. It is a practice of love, and it does start at home. That's what I believe, is like how, being a lover, a mature lover in this world is rare. And I think that's trying to emerge in many ways. And I think it starts with our partners, it starts with our families, it definitely starts with our close circles, and how we are showing up there does matter. And I think, to me, this is an ongoing practice. it's easier for me to come here and show up in this way. But, when I'm with my family and when I'm with in other contexts, I'm a different person, right? So it's an ongoing learning thing there. So, yeah. But I would say the secret ingredient is love, but also loving love in somebody else's presence. I think that changes the shift. That changes the perspective on needing the other person to be in a certain way, I think. John.
Hi, Sushant. So
Hey, John.
great to hear you speak, and really energized by what I thought was oxymoron, integral and finance and venture capital. And
yeah.
Two questions. One is, I'm curious if you were to point me in a direction to kind of learn more about integral and corporate, or I don't know if it's as simple as a Google search, but that would be one. And then two, from your perspective, are there any companies right now that are kind of getting integral right or approximating it, or I don't know, B Corps, or kind of?
I see. Lots of books, we can talk about it. One that is really handy with me right now is called Integral Impact Investments. But there are lots of books. Marianne Bozeman is also an integrally informed investor. What I'm doing, by the way, in the world of finance is basically reinventing venture capital stack, how the venture capital is done, investments, some of the ways that we sign a company. So there's a lot of legal policy work on the we can be considered as a lower right kind of work that's needed. That's not always about consciousness transformation of those kind of things. So the second question around, is any company doing integral right? I'm not sure, actually, just because it's not something that I've been keeping track of. I know there's a lot of people are involved in it. I was part of Meta-Integral with Sean Hargens. I was part of Integral Without Borders for some time. And I know many other companies trying to bring in its own way. But to me, Stegan, for example, was doing that integral consulting for some time. To me, I think bringing integral probably means different now than bringing quadrants and lines of development and all that. I think it's about more like what I said about what is the interpenetrative integral application look like? What is really indigenous in that system already, what's trying to emerge, and basically nurturing that emergence. I think that, to me, that practice is going on quite a bit. There's obviously, conscious business movement. B Corp is an interesting one. It's a whole nother conversation. I'd love to get into that. But I would say people are trying it in different ways. I'm not sure if I can point out and say like these people are doing it correctly here. Yeah.
Sushant, forgive me, but I want to butt in and offer just a little bit of pushback. I thought it was a wonderful answer, and thank you for that. And I think the topic of today's conversation, getting integral right, I think, is an oxymoron. I mean, it's also a profound truth, right? And so I think, like, to complement your answer, I hope to say that I think there's a lot of companies doing integral right, and that's betrayed by the fact that they're not doing it the same way. And that really, at the end of the day, like, integral, the theory is the beginning of the journey. The embodiment that you're sharing with us today, like, there are companies, they're going to be embodying integral in their intelligence, in their application, in a variety of spectral makeups. And so I think there's just encourage the questioner, like, it's everywhere.
It does feel like everywhere. Yeah, that's true. Actually, I teach at John F. Kennedy University, which is now National University, on course on transformational leadership. And so there were people from Google at the time who was experimenting with integral leadership there. I don't know where it went now, but it does seem like it's everywhere for sure. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Kabir.
Costco's doing it right, at least in their supply chain department. At
Yeah.
least part of it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd love to hear your insights as well. We've been kind of doing Q&A, but just what's alive for you in your journey?
I'll jump in with just there's something that's just coming up for me about, like, I think for me, like the theory U is, you know, regardless of whether they're using the integral model or whatever, it seems to me that a lot of that work is that integral consciousness that, you know, is like even Wilbur pointed out. I mean, it's like it's something that's percolating up in all these different places in the world because it's the time for integral consciousness to percolate up, and not because Ken wrote down the theory of it. And it, you know, it seems to me that like that's an example of something that is, you know, like the you know, the presencing, the bringing people together to try to find the, you know, the wisdom of this, you know, this collective, so that we as a collective make decisions that we want instead of this horror show that we've managed to produce is, you know, that's a manifestation of integral consciousness with love, to me. And I just love the, you know, kind of, I don't know, there's a way in which, I guess I'm just seeing the connection of like, oh, where did I ever hear about theory U in the first place? Well, from Kabir, you know, like, in other words, this whole thing of the full circle of like, we all are participating in this kind of thing that is like, you know, slowly in fits and starts and many failures and many experiments, you know, moving hopefully toward, you know, a better world. Like some version of that seems to me to be just happening for sure.
That is so interesting. So I think many of you know Gail Hojajka. I used to, when I first moved to Canada, I used to live with her. So we used to spend a lot of time talking about this, that integral consciousness gave birth to integral theory and not the other way around. And there's lots of other integral expressions that's emerging. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that.
I'm amazed even in the political arena, how much the word tribal is becoming ubiquitous. So it suggests some developmental awareness, slow penetration. And I did love the idea of the interpenetration in which key takeaway?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the capacity versus the consciousness. You know, I think that's almost a lifelong process. I don't think it's ever fully interpenetrated. That's for the future generations.
Yeah.
Tom, I also want to like offer a counterpoint to that. Like, and admit me, this is just my fact. This is my latest solves everything. So, and you referenced that a couple times, Sushant, I think, but that also has to do with development. We like find our way to one of these integral capacities and we get excited about it. That's the first thing you got to do. You got to find the block and think it's the coolest thing in the room, you know? And so there's this state of that I'm bought into of enlightenment. And it's not, it's a really exceptional state. But I do think it's useful and maybe even important to incorporate that into our mandala of possibilities, that actually there is a threshold whereby we break through that construct of limitations and we are present to that boundless service through all of space and time in every conceivable dimension. So I just offer that as a.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just so important because one of the things that that I do is, because as a 5, I can move to 7 in stress and get a little bit scattered, right? So I have an ongoing practice of basically saying that, okay, my work would be focused only in certain areas because I can't do everything. So I've just chosen finance as a way to practice my, integral consciousness or transformation work there, because I can't do everything. And oftentimes we are in a world right now where everybody has a podcast and everybody comments on everything, right? So we are a nation of thought leaders. And I think it was Thomas Sowell, the economist, who talked about thought leaders are people whose end products are ideas. And all of us have ideas. And but it takes a lot of time to really ground ourselves in a specific domain and kind of bring that forth, right? And I think that's been my path, is just, okay, I'm going to just focus on a couple of path and just go deep. And I've chosen basically finance and poetry. Hopefully I'll come out with a poetry book on integral consciousness poetry at some point. But yeah, that's sort of been my path, because we can't do everything. And I think it's valuable. It's important to recognize that, as a meta theorist, we often get a lot of insights into everything. And we can basically see, oh, this quadrant is missing and that level line's missing and all that. But I think it's important to build a really good set of capacities in one domain, one or two domains.
You know what strikes me is the capacity is so contingent upon lower right awareness. Because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just floats at the ethereal level. So, and I noticed Wilbur has an allergic reaction to the lower right because of his dominator hierarchies he doesn't like. And I heard him once say he's going to write a book on the lower right, but I haven't seen it.
When Bernice Solimar, my mentor and professor at JFQ, she came from spending some time with shamans. This was years ago, and went to see Wilbur. And she told Wilbur that, there are other perspectives that Integral needs to consider. There are other ways to be in the being. And why don't you write about that? And his response was, it's for you to write, because I can't do everything. I'm a pundit and I'm writing from my place in Colorado. And I think it's important to recognize. So I think that was really powerful for me. And I think it's very honest of Wilbur to say that, because I feel like, not everybody can basically do that. And I think as an integralist, I think Wilbur has provided some form of source code, but I think we need to build our own code here, build our own software, so to speak.
So Sushant, you've had a lot of training, GTC and JFK and various other places, and it seems like you've done a one, and with Suzanne, and it seems like you've done a great job of blending these all together. They've all had an influence, but would you say there's any one that moved the needle for you more than anything else?
One thing, one practice, you mean, or?
Yeah, one practice, one training, whatever.
I think one of the things that has happened in our GTC community, for example, in our GTC cohort, our cohort is the only one who still meets every year. We still do our retreat every year, and we ended years ago, 8 years ago now. So I think there's it is about teaming up. I think that I really strongly believe it's not just about waking up, growing up, cleaning up, showing up, or waking down, going down. It's about teaming up as well, because what I've seen is people with very integral consciousness, with amazing capacities, can come and build a company that has very all kinds of blind spots and shadows. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I think teaming up and working together and basically building that that intelligence as a team is very important. And I think whoever said, the next Buddha is a Sangha, I resonate with that a lot.
Yeah.
I think we're learning to be a Sangha, and I think we all need a Sangha to practice with. And I think that's been the biggest for me. I feel very fortunate because I come from such a communal culture. I feel like being part of this community, GTC, Meta-Aware Millennials, and several others, Game B and others, has been really powerful experience for sure.
Yeah, and I also love the work of even the title of the work of Samuel Bonder, the Waking Down in Mutuality.
It's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, because I think where the millennials are right now is that many of us have figured have some really insightful experiences and, awakening and all that. And then a lot of us are growing down now, waking down and really figuring out, really doing concrete. I know some of the things that you will hear in the millennial group is like, okay, so I'm trying to find a partner now. I want to settle down. I want to be at home, and that's been my experience for several years now as well. And then when you get into a relationship, then there's a whole other level of work that's needed, right? So.
Building on that, Sushant, earlier you had mentioned that you find that, was it that women find integral guys kind of difficult or challenging? Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
So this is sort of, I don't have any study on it. It's more or less of talking to my integral friends. I have a lot of integral women friends who often say that many men in integral community are not very aware of their boundaries or not very clear. They often talk about they want to have the ecstasy but not do the laundry kind of thing. There's an often talk about that. I hear a lot. And it's an ongoing conversation with my friends here, that there's that women feel lonely on the top, and there are not men sort of really reaching out or showing up in that way. So, and having been one, hopefully I'm a lot better now. I can see why that is, because it's a different kind of practice. It's not a practice of transcendence. It's definitely not a practice of only ecstasy, but it's doing the laundry as well. Right. So, yeah.
Sushant, I wonder if there's also an element of the roles that the complaint is from the women that the men aren't coming forward. There's this convention, I don't know how broad culturally it is globally, but certainly here in the West, of the man being the instigator and the aggressor of these things. And so if we're getting also from the women the story that the men aren't coming for me, or the men that are just the dogs, like what's the story like? Yeah, such depth.
Yeah. It's an interesting times. The men and women's relationship is going through a shift, and I think we don't know how to be. To me, I think what's happening, the way I see it is like the practice for relationship for me is, what is a self-authoring and self-transforming relationship look like, right? What is that being in a partnership with others, and being partnership especially in the romantic partnership? There's a lot that comes out, and working through that is difficult and painful. And I think, there's the way I do it is like I work with a teacher. So there's like the way I said, I learned this from Adyashanti, where he said that when he started becoming really popular, and he went to his mother and he went to his wife saying that if you ever see me go off track as a spiritual teacher, please point that out to me. So it was he had all this safeguard that he put up, and I've done that for myself. I have a group of people, a men's group that I'm part of, that gives me feedback on an ongoing basis, and they're very good at grounding me really right away when I'm flying high. I have my therapist / teacher that I work with on, especially on the masculine heart. So I think we all need that grounding relationships in our lives.
You made that a specific practice, an explicit practice?
I did, yeah.
Calling these people forward to watch you in that way.
Yeah, I did. I call it my wisdom circle. And I have people in finance, I have people in masculine heart relationship that are reflection to me about who I am. And I take that in quite seriously, for sure, yeah.
It also sounds like part of the mastery is developing the competency and not just the consciousness.
Yeah. In practice, right? It's not about just being magician or a coach, right? I think we're good at that when it comes to others, but it's being in practice all the time, and that requires a lot of patience. Yeah.
I think a challenge that integral couples, I'll say, have, or not even couples, but maybe two integral people that want to try to engage in a relationship, let alone just relating, is there aren't really models for it. And most models exist in first tier for relating in relationship.
Yeah.
Boundaries, for example. That's very big in first tier, particularly Orange on down. And roles about what that's supposed to look like. Green, to some extent, has that. But in integral, especially beyond integral, like turquoise or above, and the closest I can get to it is not so much that it's boundaries, but having the hypersensitivity of how I present with the other person. Not just to, but with the other person, to navigating this uncharted territory in a way that I'm super sensitive, and knowing that there aren't any rules per se, at least in terms of how I approach it. It's knowing that there has to be a hypersensitivity because we don't have any rules to fall back on so much, because the old standard rules of first tier around relating seem to detract from our ability to really integrally, intimately, not sexually necessarily, but intimately, delicately engage each other. So the first tierness, even though it's supposedly about transform or transcend and include, for me it's more like transcend and evolve, that stuff. So how to bring the value of the first tierness stuff into second tier and beyond in a way that it doesn't detract from second tier and beyond. So it's the unchartedness is really salient for me of that kind of stuff. For me, it's with women, and how to be open and available to myself as well as to her. And especially if she's pointing out something, that I can be with that and not go into defensiveness, which to me, defensiveness is more of a first tier quality. It doesn't show up for me so much, especially at turquoise. It's being able to like listen, like, oh wow, yeah, you're seeing that, and give me space to like be with it, like, and get at, try to just really kind of embody and be with what she's seeing, and that I can honor her for seeing it, honor myself for being able to be with what she's seeing, and not knowing where that's going to go even. You have the courage to just stay with that and be present to it, and just trust the universe in a sense that, this, no matter how scary that might get or how even uncomfortable or unpleasant it might get, trust the universe that, which shows up through trusting myself and trusting her. I need to turn off an alert that's talking to me, and I can still hear y'all, and hopefully you can still hear me, and sort of switch gears. Sushant, I really want to thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I've been speechless during most of this whole 2.5 hours, whatever. Just being with you and feeling you and listening to you and being amazed by you. Yeah, just a big heart, just a big thank you. I invite you back, not that I speak for the group, but I would love to see you back to be and do whatever you want to do. You don't even need an agenda for me. Just show up. Just show up. Have space for us, engage us, involve us. I don't mean to put you on a pedestal like some kind of guru. That's not what I'm doing. I really get your groundedness and your availability to us, which really feels healthier than a guru. Not that I've ever had a guru. One of the reasons I think I never had a guru was just the whole, listen to what I say and do only as I say. Just that never worked for me. But anyhow, so yeah, please come back.
Thank you.
Again, I don't speak for the group, but I think some people agree with me. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that means a lot. And like I said, I think one of the biggest gift of studying integral has been constantly making new relationship, finding new friends, and really expand. It feels very expansive in my in circle. So yeah. So thank you so much. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and just to hear stories. I think I'm very feel like I have a lot of stories to share, but I'm always curious about everybody's stories, what has been the journey, and what has been sort of the different phases of life. Those are amazing stories here, and I am always curious to hear more. So yeah, thank you, Larry. And I do come from a tradition of being guru. I always had gurus in my life, and I always had on the pedestal and all of that stuff. And over the years, I've kind of learned having a different relationship with gurus. I don't exclusively work with anybody right now, but that was part of the tradition that I grew up in. It was family gurus. And so it almost feels like because that is so familiar to me, I feel like I have not really paid attention in putting them on pedestal so much. So, yeah.
Well, folks, we're at the top of the hour here, and probably
we
about
are.
time to wrap it up. That's 3 hours of sitting is just about probably a good limit, if not beyond. But Sushant, as others have mentioned, it's just been a joy to have you here, and I was super confident that that would be the outcome when I invited you, because I just loved what every time I've been in contact with you, see what you've presented, and then any discussion that we've had and everything. And again, I just really appreciate what you bring to us as a community, and I just love to see it. Again, these little, all of these different circles of connection and interaction, and I think we're all kind of spiraling upward in some way. So that's feels great to be a part of that. So I'd like to again just one thanks to Sushant from everyone, and we'll wrap it up here. And again, we'll post the recording in a couple days on the Meetup site and Facebook site.
Yeah, thank you, Sushant.
Thank you, everyone. Love and hugs.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up and
thank you.
sharing.
Great
This was
seeing
wonderful.
y'all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Night,
Good
everyone.
night.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.